All right, Mike, we are live. So we'll give people a few minutes to jump in. But
Yep.
from here on out, everything we say and talk about
Wow.
is out there for everybody.
Very good. Very good. So I'll let you start off the conversation
Yeah, I'll get it. I'll get it flowing. Shortly thereafter. Generally, what I do is I give people. I usually start a few minutes after the room's been open, uh, in case people have technical
mhm. Yep.
difficulties or they have trouble getting into the room if they're technologically challenged, like I know I am.
Yeah.
So I give
And
people a little chance to get in there.
and I'm right there with you. But one thing I do want to say is I do like that shirt. So I'm hoping that one of these days I can I can have access to one.
Well, it's going to be coming soon, brother. All right, so we got our first guest, Kalon. That's my older brother. Hey, Kalon, how you doing?
Hey, Kalon, how are you?
So he's out there. I think my daughter wants to. Do you want to come say hello? No. Okay. She just
Yeah.
wants to linger.
Yeah. I had to shut the door because my son will be down here sitting on my lap as I'm.
Hey, that's all right, man. We're family men.
Yeah. Yep.
This is our
Yep.
motivation to do this job and to
Yep.
come home safe is for our family, for the love of the
Most
family. So
most definitely. Most definitely. And so I know, Dean. I know you hopped around for a bit, right? You've been to a few. You got to see a variety of departments.
yes, I've won six different badges. And if I do the count, I don't even think that includes Longwood. Let me think here. Uh, so I'll start with Longwood, where you and I met.
Yep.
Longwood, Boston School Police, UMass Boston, Boston University, and then while I was there, I was also at Stonehill part time, and then the city of Manchester, New Hampshire, and now here in Stoughton. So what? That's seven total.
So
But
let me
six.
ask you. Let me ask
Yeah.
you this: what's your best badge?
Well, clearly I have to say the one I have now, right? I mean,
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff.
but yeah, but working in an urban environment probably fit me best
Yeah.
as far
Yeah.
as that. Just being out there and truly working the streets was something that it felt natural.
Yep.
Being out there in the city doing that
Yep.
thing. But
Yep.
but I'm from Stoughton, and obviously that's natural too. When I'm out and about and I'm doing my thing, I'm working a detail. I got people, hey, Dean. I got people honking their horn going by. People I played sports with. People
Yep.
whose houses I slept over.
Yep.
People whose I've eaten dinner with them. People whose parents they see me around and they stop. I mean, I've had people stop their car and parents give me hugs and kisses in the middle
Mm-hmm.
of the road. Well, obviously pre-COVID, but before, and that's the beautiful thing about working in
Yeah.
the town I grew up in, and these people got a chance to see that little ball of energy that might have been a bit much to handle back when I was a kid actually did grow up into something with the help of all these different people.
Yeah. Now, do you, so others will have a different perspective as far as policing in the community that they grew up in. Do you find that um, it adds some complication to it, or just business as usual?
Depends on your personality. For the most part, it's been helpful for me because if you, as I know because
Mm-hmm.
you grew up where you work, right? You grew up in
Mm-hmm.
Malden.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right, so people that you've put in the time with and they've known you to be a reasonable and fair person, I've been able to help solve problems
Yep.
because people have known me to be reasonable and
Yep.
fair even as a kid.
Yep.
And now that I mean, I guess I still have the same gap teeth, but aside from that, I don't look like a kid anymore with all this white hair in my beard. But people still remember me, and there's been a few times where that currency I built up as a kid or as a
Yeah.
teenager, or even as a young adult, has helped me in this role.
Yeah. But
So
you said it best. It's has something to do with you being reasonable and kind too. Uh,
when the
that
time is right, absolutely. I
yep.
mean, obviously, every once in a while, someone puts you in a position where you just can't be kind
Right.
anymore.
Right.
You know what
Yep.
I mean? They've chosen their path, and they put you in a situation where where all the talk and you could have a silver tongue, it won't make a difference. At some point,
Yep.
you have to move things along, and that is always the one thing I can always say, 100%, Mike, is that is a decision that has never been mine. That is, if when things have to escalate beyond that, it is not my decision. That is the decision of the person I'm dealing with.
Yep.
And 16 years of doing this line of work, I can say that and hold my head high saying that. But it seems like some people are jumping in here, Mike. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everybody. Welcome back to Difficult Conversations. This is episode number 4. Tonight, I have a very special guest with me. I have Detective Sergeant or Sergeant Detective Michael Powell. Mike, do you mind if I say what department you work for?
No, no problem at all.
Okay, so Mike works for the Malden Police Department, which is a city that is just north of Boston. A little bit about Mike. He describes himself as being born as Michael Powell, but he currently works with the title of a police officer. While working as a full-time police officer, Mike attended Salem State University, and he's graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. He started his career in patrol and was eventually given the opportunity to work in plainclothes. He also served with the Malden Police Special Operations Unit for 10 years. Now, Mike, what is that? Your version of SWAT?
Yeah. It's just a softer word.
All right, so it's Malden's version of SWAT, and as we know in today's time, sometimes we have to soften up words because words matter.
Yep.
And he's been with Malden for 15 years. And he retired from the team. Was it 3 years ago you retired from that team? 2017?
I think it was about 2016.
2016 you retired from the SWAT team because it is, of course, for the most part, it's a young man's game. So prior to starting your career in law enforcement, you served 6 years active duty in the Army.
Yep.
And you earned an honorable discharge in 2004 with the rank of E5 Sergeant. And in your current role, you are assigned to the Criminal Investigations Unit, and you are a supervisor, and you work, and you have 11 investigators under you?
So part of that number consists of 2 other supervisors.
All right, so you supervise approximately 8 people.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So a little bit about why is Mike here tonight, folks? Mike is here because, as I stated earlier, Mike and I work together in as Boston Specials, and that is very similar to what like the Boston Housing Police. Like we had jurisdiction in certain housing developments in Boston. And as I'm sure those of you that are deep thinkers can probably conjure up in your head, typically you don't hire police officers for the well-to-do sections of a city. So we were in the roughest of the rough areas of Boston, and that's where we cut our teeth in law enforcement. So you can imagine your very first brush in law enforcement, you're in there with some real folks that we're dealing with on a regular basis. So, Mike, I'm going to have you just talk a little bit about yourself. Tell us about, about how you, about like some of how you started and why you stuck with it and how you ended up where you are now in your current capacity.
Yeah. So I was, I think I've always had an interest in law enforcement as a teen. I think I saw my opportunity to get there a little quicker, or with some help, I should say, by joining the service. And the service was twofold. It was to assist me with helping, kind of fund my way through college. Thank you, Uncle Sam. And it was also a quicker way or a quicker route into law enforcement. So I was very, very fortunate during my time serving the 6 years, met a lot of folks. And then ultimately where I met you, Dean, working as a special, and I think that really gave me a great foundation as far as what I was getting into. I think it was solid experience, and it really put you in situations, and sometimes it put you in uncomfortable situations, and maybe that situations you weren't necessarily comfortable with, especially being newer to that law enforcement field. And like you said, some of the areas that we worked, it was it. I mean, some serious areas. So I think if you can police in those areas and get yourself through as far as interacting with people, I think you could probably do it anywhere. So very, very fortunate to have worked in that environment. Like I said, I met folks like you, and and a lot of the other coworkers that we had when we did the job there have kind of moved on to different things in law enforcement. So, but yeah, and when you introduce me and as born as Mike Powell, I like to say that because
Talk a
I'm
little bit about that. Yeah, explain what that what does
well,
that mean, Mike?
because I'm human. So I wasn't born as Officer Powell or Sergeant Powell. And first of all, for folks chiming in here, I just want everyone to let you know these are my perspectives. So if we want, this conversation is based upon my perspectives. It doesn't reflect the values or thought process of my department. This is Mike Powell here talking to people. So, and I like to introduce myself not as a cop, but as Mike Powell, because that's who I was born with. That what I do when I put that badge on, that's what I do for work. That's how I support myself. So that's why I like to say, I'm born as Mike Powell, not Officer Powell, not Sergeant Powell. And I think that opens up, or it makes conversations with people a little lighter. Everything doesn't have to be so serious, but at times, obviously, Dean, that it does have to be serious. So,
100%. So, keeping with that theme, so you as Mike Powell, as opposed to being the rigid cop and Sergeant Powell, how was that received on the street when you were out, back when you were in a radio car or even walking a beat? How was that received?
I've been very, very fortunate. Just my time in the service, I come from a very diverse community, even more so now than when I was younger. But I've always been around a very diverse group of people. From my time in the service to the community that I've lived in to now where I police. So I think to have a real connection with people and to make it genuine, you got to kind of drop the barrier down a little bit and be Mike. Don't be Officer Powell. Be Mike. And I think that when you do that, it opens up lines of communication more effectively, I think, with people. If you can talk on equal terms and not put that automatic barrier of I'm talking to you as Sergeant Powell and you shall listen. That turns people off. So I like to start it off as, hey, I'm Mike, and I think that opens up lines of communication more effectively.
I agree. I think it's always easier, again, just like Mike said, and just like I say every time I have any kind of an episode or any taping I do, these are my views. These are Dean Jenkins' views. My views do not necessarily reflect the views of the Stoughton Police Department. Like Mike said, it's where I work. It's where I'm able to provide for my family, and hopefully, if I can touch a life or two while I'm doing my job, then that's a bonus. But
Mm-hmm.
again, these views are my own. So, like Mike said, it's easy to me to go up. Like if you come in low and you come in like, hey, listen, I'm conversationally and I'm here to help, and you're making yourself human to the people you're dealing with, it is much easier to start there and then to escalate it if they
Mm-hmm.
dictate that you have to escalate than it is to try to come up way up here. And then after you've probably gone too far, now you have to try to dial it back and then try to repair the damage you've done by coming in and basically scorching earth when you
Mm-hmm.
show up. Because we've all, I can see in the comments, there's several people that are working police officers that are in the comments. We've all worked with that person that when you get on the radio and you call for backup, or if somebody says that they're coming to back you up, in the back of my mind, we're like, oh, no, not you. You know what I mean? Like, take a lunch break or something. Just go get a cold drink. I got things under control here. I don't really need you to be the gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
Because we know that when they show up, things are going to get escalated,
Yeah.
even if they needn't be.
Yeah.
So I agree with you there. It definitely helps to be as conversational as possible during those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we're talking about that, let's get down to the nitty gritty here. Bill 2800. So for those of you at home, if you are a taxpayer, if you are a stakeholder in Massachusetts, this pertains to you quite a bit. So recently, the Senate passed a bill. It's called Rule 2800. And I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest of this. It's a long document. So I'm just going to read here. I have some notes from Attorney John Sheft. Attorney Sheft is one of the leading trainers in Massachusetts. I first had him in 2006 at the Lowell Police Academy. He was our criminal he was our criminal law instructor, and I don't want to say I fell in love with him, but I mean, he was drawn in. Those are long, hard days in the academy. And I went in the middle of summer, and this man had me sitting on the edge of my seat for the entire class.
Yeah.
That is hard to do when you are running, you're getting yelled at, you're getting told this, you got to polish shoes, you got to iron clothes. And I knew that I had criminal law with Attorney Sheft the next day. That was something to look forward to, because he was so good, and he was so passionate, and his explanations were so crisp and precise. So with that introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about what he has. He kind of has some Cliff Notes version that make it very easy to understand. So I'm going to read verbatim. The Senate and the House, they have bills that are identical, and they show provisions regarding the changes in permissible use of force by police officers. While a lot of attention has been paid to qualified immunity, we've all been hearing that term a lot recently, qualified immunity, these provisions, which radically restrict police use of force, have largely flown under the radar. In these bills, the Senate creates a new general law chapter, which is section 147A, while the House spreads identical language within several sections of their new chapter, 6E. The proposed changes would end the historical and current view adopted by courts and literally thousands of well-reasoned decisions that the use of force by police must be reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances. So that's the use of force criteria that we have in place right now, is that it has to be objectively reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances. So here's what this new bill, should this become law, this is what the new bill is going to mandate. The legislator's new language: a law enforcement officer shall not use physical force upon another person unless de-escalation tactics have been attempted and failed or are not feasible based on the totality of the circumstances, and such force is necessary to, okay, I'm going to give you some examples here. Number one, affect the arrest of a person. 2, prevent the escape from custody of a person. Or 3, prevent imminent harm, and the amount of force is proportional to the threat of imminent harm. So, a couple things here. At the surface, it sounds great. For example, the new bill or the new law language that they're proposing, it says de-escalation tactics. But here's the problem. They don't define what makes a de-escalation tactic. It just says de-escalation tactic, and basically they're saying that we are going to decide on a case-by-case basis what constitutes a de-escalation tactic. So let that sink in for a moment. So what that means in plain language is that Sergeant Mike Powell in Malden PD can say, hey, Malden police, stop what you're doing, drop your weapon, and that can be deemed a de-escalation tactic. And then the next week, Dean Jenkins in Stoughton PD can say, hey, stop what you're doing, drop the weapon, and then that could be used, somebody could say that's not a de-escalation tactic based on the totality of the circumstances. Mm-hmm. So there's no bright line rules as to what makes something de-escalation and what makes something not de-escalation, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is troublesome, because I can't think of any line of work, I can't think of anybody where every day you come to work, the line gets pushed back a little bit. So imagine if you make widgets, all right? If you work at the widget factory and you make widgets and you're expected to make 10 widgets a day, and then you come in tomorrow and now it's 15. Then you come in the next day and then they're like, all right, well, you know what? That wasn't bad, 13. Then you come in on Thursday and now it's 20. So every day you come into work, you don't know what's expected of you anymore. That is what happens when you make these rulings and you don't have clear objectives and clear definitions of these terms.
Yeah.
And if you are a stakeholder or a law-abiding citizen or a taxpayer and you want to get the most bang for your buck out of your police department, that should worry you. And I'm going to tell you why. Here are a couple examples. All right. So, Mike, what do you think about this? This is one of the drawbacks that Attorney Sheff outlines in his essay here. So, officers will no longer be able to physically detain and or frisk suspects based on reasonable suspicion. The new standard forbids the many instances when reasonable force is permitted to detain a suspect for an investigation and frisk them for weapons and or handcuff them for their safety and the safety of the police officers. So, Mike, talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, you mentioned some of this stuff, and you almost need a law degree to kind of interpret some of this stuff. So you can just imagine how officers on the street have to interpret some of this stuff. And I just wanted to say that to make a point is sometimes, I think it makes things more relevant, whether it's training, what have you, when you speak directly to the stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are the men and women who are who are patrolling the streets, not necessarily, staff or not necessarily higher ups. Because Dean, that sometimes when you climb the ladder in the police department, sometimes you forget, or sometimes you don't necessarily have the full concept of what men and women in the street are doing, and that's important for folks who are sitting in the legislature, and that's important for those of us who make rank and climb, and sometimes, like I said, we forget about where we came from sometimes, and I think it's important to point that out, because the men and women that wear the uniform and are responding to these calls day after day, minute after minute. They're the stakeholders. So you need to have their voice when it's high stakes, and these are high stakes because ultimately affects officer safety. When you engage in a situation and you're second guessing yourself because you don't know how to interpret what's being put out. When something is forced upon you and you haven't been giving a fair chance to test it out, train on it, to really let people digest it. So to have something forced down your throat without any input from stakeholders, and again, stakeholders to me are the men and women who are wearing the uniform, who are responding to calls day after day, who are in the streets, not necessarily the people sitting in the office. And this is not to knock those who've made rank. That's not what this is about. What I'm saying is sometimes we forget, as a supervisor, sometimes I need to be humbled because I'm not necessarily the first one responding to these crucial calls or these critical calls. And I think that they're the ones that you have to talk to, because they're the ones that has to interpret this language or these new changes. And, you have to give people a chance to digest that. Sorry if I got off track there, Dee.
No. Honestly, this new language, Mike, it's got a lot of people feeling some kind of way. So so you're gonna have to speak it like you feel it, brother. So let me jump to a comment here. So I have Mike Capizzoli. Mike, how you doing? Mike says it sounds like it can put the officer's safety at risk, and you can also risk losing your alleged suspect. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I guess the question is, so you get put into a situation where you have a reason to believe, reasonable suspicion to believe that somebody was or just committed a crime. So you approach that individual and you try to ascertain some information to either deny or confirm whether it's supported. So how do you do that? And it sounds like in order to do that, you ultimately have to make an arrest. So if you're putting stipulations on what I can do when you're being detained, and again, this is reasonable suspicion. So when you're in prior to this, what it is if you have reasonable suspicion, you can make an investigatory detention to acquire whether or not that person was in fact involved in criminal activity. So when you take that away, when you take that discretion away, it's confusing to me. So what do you? I don't understand what you want me to do at this point. If
Mike, let me jump in real quick. You said investigatory detention. So for those of you that are following along at home and you might not be familiar with that term, that is the lowest common denominator of that term is when you tell somebody you're not under arrest, but you're not free to leave either, pending the investigation of what the allegation is, what that brought us here. So that's what an investigative detention is. You're not free to leave, but you're not under arrest either. You know, we're just trying to, you know, it's kind of like we're in purgatory, so to speak. You know, like you're being detained until we figure out either clear you or we figure out that we have probable cause to make an arrest. Go ahead, Mike. I just wanted to make sure that people understood what that was.
Yep. And so when you take that away, when you take that investigative tool away, again, based on a reasonable suspicion, you're being stopped for some articulable facts, right? That's important to understand. It's you're being stopped for a reason, and you have to be able to explain that. So when you take that reasonable suspicion away, when I can't physically, so ultimately what it's saying is, if I stop you and I have articulable facts, reasonable suspicion that I believe that you were involved in a crime, and I can no longer detain you, how do you? What tools are you? What other tools are you given to identify the person, to hold the person accountable, to corroborate information that you're given? You're taking a lot of discretion away as far as how to actually investigate incidents that occur. So so again, it's very confusing, and again, it sounds like, based upon that language, and based upon my understanding of John Szefc's interpretation of that language, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, again, they didn't speak to those who have a stake in the matter. That doesn't, to anyone who goes to calls day after day, that does not make sense. And I don't understand how folks think that police officers are going to do their job once you take that away.
100%. So let me move on from there and go on to the next part, because wait, folks, there's more. All right. And Bob Evangelista, I'm going to get to you in 1 second. So officers' ability to use protective custody will be removed. So those of you that don't understand the whole protective custody thing, that is a tool that we have as police officers where we are able to take somebody into custody for either alcohol or drug incapacitation, which is incapacitation is a fancy word for saying that they're not in a position to take care of themselves properly. All right. And even though it is common and important public safety intervention by officers, in fact, since the protective custody laws found in Chapter 111B, if you want to look it up, or 111E, it explicitly state that protective custody is not an arrest. The new laws lack the coverage for this police activity and will spawn needless litigation. All right. So protective custody, that is when somebody is intoxicated to the point where they don't really even know where they are, where they can't, sometimes people can't tell you their name, and they don't need to be arrested and charged criminally, but you can't leave them up to their own devices either. Those are the people that could stumble into a street, get hit by a car. Those are people that could end up being victims of the crime themselves. Those are people that could possibly get behind the wheel of a car and create a whole slew of new victims. And those people need to be accounted for one way or the other. And the tool we've used, certainly in my 16 years and well beyond that, was protective custody. But a protective custody is all based on reasonable suspicion. But now reasonable suspicion is taken away from us. What are we supposed to do with those people? Do we arrest them? So, Mike, if somebody is incapacitated in public, I'm sure you'd agree that's an easy decision, right? Yep.
Well, and absolutely, and the PC mechanism that's currently stands today is it's just it's a safeguard for society as well as a safeguard for that individual. I mean, it's for their own safety and the safety of the general public. And that's and again, it's not an arrest, but this is an opportunity for law enforcement to provide that person with some protective measures, whether it's a hospital, whether it's their home where somebody else can take custody of that person that's responsible enough to make sure that they're okay, or the police station as the last resort. And a lot of based upon my experience, that usually typically is the police department is usually a last resort. That's when that individual has nowhere else to go. And in order to protect that person, which makes sense, because the last thing you want to do is let a person who's intoxicated walk off. If you don't have that PC mechanism and you let that person walk off, and that person either falls, splits his or her head open, gets hit by a car, or what have you, whose responsibility is that now? Where does that liability? Where does that liability now fall? Because you, as a law enforcement officer, had the last contact with that person. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't with this new language as far as this new mechanism. So what do you do?
And to your point, Mike, there's a record of that too, because if you call that name in, and now there it is, it's memorialized forever that you had that contact, like you said. Are we left holding the bag now from a liability standpoint when that person, now that we can no longer detain unless we arrest them? Mm-hmm. Because again, if they do this in public, they can be arrested for some of our public offense crimes, such mm-hmm. as disorderly conduct. Mm-hmm. They can be arrested for that. Mm-hmm. But here's one for you. What happens when you get called to someone's home and they are incapacitated at home, and the people that live with them are like, listen, we can't deal with this person anymore. This person's getting aggressive. This person is combative.
Yep.
And we PC that person. We either get them to the hospital or we bring them to jail so they can dry out. Now that option's been taken away, but they're not in public, so now we don't have the public aspects of those crimes. What can we do then?
Well, no, let's take it up a step. And this is for cities and towns to think about also, is where does that liability now fall? Where does that liability fall? Like whose responsibility is that? So if you take that mechanism away, and again, it's a safety mechanism. It's nothing other than a safety mechanism. It's when you PC protective custody, when you put someone in protective custody, it is not an arrest. It's a safety mechanism to ensure that person is not put in harm's way, or the general public is not put in harm's way. So when you again, if you don't have that mechanism in place, where does the liability fall?
Are we absolved? Are we as police? So we get called to that same scenario that a month ago was good to go if I placed that person in protective custody from their house. So this gets passed, and now what? There's a person that you and I both know, we're seasoned police officers. I work with a ton of great cops, a lot of young guys, and they're sponges, and they pick up information beautifully. So we've trained these young people, and these people that have come before me have trained me that this is what we do in this circumstance.
Yep.
To help the people that called us looking for help and assistance.
Right.
But now if we walk away and something happens, who is liable?
Right.
Conveniently, it's not in the bill. But we all know who's going to be liable.
And Dean, you have to, and the general public has to understand, and this isn't just a thing, a law enforcement thing. This is also for the general public, because you're the voice. The power is in is supposed to be in your voice. So what you want for your communities is ultimately what you shall get. And you have to understand what that entails. And there's always for every action there's a reaction. So you have to think about what that entails. If you take away a lot of these mechanisms that are in this bill that they're trying to pass, the communities will ultimately be severely affected by this. Not just law enforcement. And I hope people realize that. And we're hearing some silent support. I'll call it silent support from the general public, but I think there needs to be more than silent support, because this ultimately affects communities, not just law enforcement. So I want people to understand that it's important for them, for the general public to understand what this language in this new bill entails and what it ultimately can do to your communities that you live in.
Well stated. So those of you that jumped on again, if you came on a little late, I'm here with Detective Sergeant Michael Powell from the Malden Police Department, and we're talking about the Senate Bill 2800, which is it's dominated the conversations where I work. Myself and people that I confide in at my job, we've talked about it quite a bit. It's troubling on a lot of different levels. So I'm going to go to the comments here. So I'm going to go back to Bob Evangelista. Bob writes, which is why it's frustrating when legislators don't seek input from those in a position to offer interpretations or examples of scenario. Hopefully the House and Senate form in this committee to just that, so the language can sound something, that can eliminate some of the ambiguity of the language that they're using. I agree with you 100%, Bob. I'm a defensive tactics instructor. I've been doing that it's been about 4 years now. I am also I'm on the regional crisis negotiation team. In addition to the fact that I'm a supervisor and I've been doing this for 16 years. You think somebody might have wanted to hear what I thought about any of this? Like I'm trusted by the state to teach cops, new and old, use of force and defensive tactics. And I can tell you right now, the people I teach with and me, none of us were consulted about any of this. So to Mike's point, distance causes amnesia. So the further away from the street you are, the more you forget what it was like to be out there. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine what it's like for people that were never out on the streets. They have no idea what it's like to be out there, but yet they're going to make these decisions. So Mike Capozzoli, so they are expecting officers to section people in that condition, and because that sounds like it holds up an officer on scene till they can transfer care to EMS. So I don't think that it's necessarily going to rise to the level of a section. So for those of you at home, there's these laws called sections, or pink slips. Sometimes we used to call them if you've been on for quite some time. Where basically we force people to go to the hospital because they can't care for themselves. Maybe they've made some sort of suicidal ideations. That's something that's sectionable. But in this case, with the protective custody, Mike, that might not be sectionable. Sometimes. Go ahead, Mike.
And Section 12 has more to do with your psychological capacity at that point. Meaning that there's some suicidal statements that were made. Something that there's an indication that you are in need of help because someone believes that you are capable of harming yourself. I guess you can argue somebody's incapacitated state may be a level of them wanting to harm themselves, but without any indication from them or somebody else, I don't think it will necessarily fall under a Section 12, and that's where that protective custody mechanism comes into place when it doesn't fall on the Section 12 side of the house.
And of course, there's a section. What is it? The one that the family fills out.
Yes.
Somebody's got drug addicted or alcohol addicted.
Yep.
They have to go to court and they can petition the court
right.
to have us go and basically arrest the person and force them to go to court so they can be sent to treatment.
With a court order.
So that will be that's difficult now too, because it's not a real arrest. I mean, yes, you're bringing them to court, but I mean, are we using force? Because according to this, it looks like there might be some problems if we use force to arrest those people, which brings me to my next one. All right. Officers will be very limited in their ability to manage dangerous mental health encounters, i.e. our drug addicted folks out there. The new law does not authorize the use of force for this purpose. Responding officers cannot, I repeat, cannot resort to force in cases where a person might be suicidal and or dangerous because of his or her mental condition and in desperate need of evaluation and maybe hospitalization. So there you have it, folks. So that answers a question that I just asked. So Mike, what percentage of calls when you were still patrolling, maybe even a sergeant of patrol, what percentage of calls did you deal with that had some component of mental health? And I'm lumping drug and alcohol addiction into that because clearly that is a mental health issue as well.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we in society right now we're dealing with a lot of mental health. A good majority of the calls that we're dealing with, where it gets, where we're getting into some physical altercations, a lot of it has to do with mental health, where it can go from 0 to 100 real quick. So, and again, with that being said, there's no doubt about it that we need something in place in society sooner rather than later that deals with mental health. But I don't. That doesn't necessarily have to fall on law enforcement, but you have to be careful in regards to some other talks in regards to putting civilian professionals in certain situations dealing with people that are suffering from mental health, because it really can go bad very, very quickly. And a lot of times, in order to safely and effectively restrain somebody and get them help, and primarily get them help to the hospital, it always results in some physical force, unfortunately. But again, if there was other ways to deal with that, I wish there was. I really do. But unfortunately, that's where we are in policing. I mean, if somebody had the magic answer, please share it with us. Share it with the legislators who are making these laws. Please, we're begging you. Everyone that wears the uniform, we're begging you. But unfortunately, there is nothing right now. But again, something like this can't be forced down the men and women that wear the uniform. It can't be forced down the throat like that without digesting it, training, and it requires a lot of training. But unfortunately, society right now, we're suffering from a lot of mental health, and we don't have any effective mechanisms to deal with it, and that's the unfortunate part.
So, well stated, Mike. So let me ask you this, or let me paint a scenario to those of you that are out there, because everybody that's on this. And yes, John Barney, thank you very much. It's a section 35. I couldn't remember the section off the top of my head, So what happens when we get called to a house? Because I know you have too. I've been called for the unruly juvenile call. Mm-hmm. We have somebody, let's say we have a 14-year-old male. Now, a lot of 14-year-old males are physically to the point where they are a serious match for their mothers, right? Because I know when I was 14, I was considerably bigger and stronger than my mother, and I did what my mother asked me to do most of the time. Ma, I know you're on here. I most of the time I did what I did, but it was out of respect. It wasn't because my mother could physically force me to do it, because she couldn't anymore. Mm-hmm. So what happens when we get called for the unruly juvenile that has the alphabet soup of conditions, and now that mother called us for help, but according to this, we can't help that person if they have decided to be physical and they have decided that they are going to impose their will on their mother. Mm-hmm. Are we supposed to just turn around and leave and say, best of luck to you, ma'am? Yep. According to this bill, that's what it looks like to me. And you people, you taxpayers, you stakeholders, you people that expect something out of you, that expect help when you call for it, you need to know that this is what's about to happen, what could happen soon. Yeah. And
let me just, Dean, if I could just kind of explain it on a smaller scale,
Sure,
but it still has some relevance. It's like the marijuana issue that was passed in regards to several communities. When we still get inundated with calls in regards to marijuana. It's coming in the windows. My neighbor, smoking too much. It's seeping in through the doors. I'm being affected. Folks, that was as a result of people who voted for it. And as a result of that, it took a lot of the authority that we had to regulate some of that stuff. It took that away. And this is just on a smaller scale. But I wanted to kind of give you an idea on a smaller level of what it would entail if some of these laws were put into place today in regards to this new language that they're putting into the bill. It would really, really have an effect on the communities, and I think that's important for community members to digest that stuff and really be vocal. If you support it, hey, listen, you have to live in the communities. If you support it, you support it. I'm not here to sway you one way or the other. But I hope that, but I do encourage to go out there and do research and read on it and don't let it fall by the wayside, because ultimately it affects you, where you live. It's going to affect you.
All right. So I'm going to do one more. This bill, there's so much more to this bill than I could ever go into. I mean, it would take me a week, a week-long show to go into all this. But there's one more component that I think that I need to bring up, and then we'll start taking some questions if you want to put questions in the chat. All right. You're going to love this part. Using force to prevent a crime in progress will no longer be an option. That's right. The definition of imminent harm in both Senate and House versions, it requires, absent an arrest or an escape, that an officers face situations in which there is a risk of serious physical injury or death. In defensive tactics, just so you know, serious physical injury, we define that as anything that would be life-changing. So if you have some sort of an injury that will change the way you live your life, that would be a serious physical injury. All right, so stay with me. This means that a risk of a non-deadly physical force would no longer justify any police force. The result would be officers who forcefully intervene to prevent an assault and battery, for example, or an indecent assault and battery, could be disciplined, decertified as police officers, and even sued on the basis that the anticipated crimes did not risk serious physical injury or death.
Wow.
So let me give you some examples, folks. And I got to do, I have a guy, he's on the call, and you know who you are, and I got to do this for you. Because that's his thing when he's deep in thought. So let's digest this. Let's break it down a little bit. So we get called to a fight in progress, a fist fight in progress. 4 people fighting, no weapons, but they're throwing heavy hands at each other and they're trying to hurt each other. According to this, we can't break that up unless we're going to arrest everybody. How many times do you go to a fight or at a football game? You got 2 people, jarring at each other. Like sometimes I'll work detail at Gillette Stadium, and you get people that jarring at each other. Maybe they're pushing and shoving a little bit. If I intervene and I lay hands on anybody, I got to arrest them. I can't just separate people and say, no, you knock it off, you go that way, you go that way, and let's be done here. Mm-hmm. So This is going to force us to put more people in the court and further bog down the courts for something that is essentially, it's not something that's taken too serious by the courts. Or how about this? All you men out there, your wives, your significant others, women out there, your wives, your significant others. Somebody comes up and grabs, I'm out to eat with my wife. Somebody comes up and grabs my wife's breast. Right? I do the right thing. So instead of putting this person through the street, let's just say instead of me doing that, I try to go the legal route and I call the police. This person leaves. So the offender now tries to walk away and leave when the police come. According to this, the police can't use physical force to stop that person. That's an indecent assault and battery. So now, according to this, all I can do is, if I'm called to that, is I can just ask the person, hey, do you mind stopping so I can have a conversation with you? And if I'm decide to arrest them, I guess then I can use force. But if it's a misunderstanding, or if somebody brushes up against somebody and it's a perceived indecent assault and battery, I can't even detain them to figure that out. It's either arrest or I got to let them walk off.
Right.
Mike, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I think you made some valid points, Dean. But this is going to go in the opposite direction of what the legislator is looking for. I mean, they're ultimately saying we want to reduce the number of arrests, for for lack of a better term. But this can ultimately, what this is doing is it's taking some of the discretion away. So if there's a more minor crime, and I have to use physical force to intervene, you are now forcing me to say, I got no discretion. What I have to do now is I have to place you in custody. So let's take, for instance, mutual combat. Just two individuals who do not know each other get into a little scruffle, and do they necessarily have to be arrested? No, not necessarily. I mean, you have some discretion there. It depends upon the severity or the situation, right? Every case is different. But let's say for this particular matter, it wasn't that bad. No one was banged up too bad. But now you're there. You intervene. Now, if you intervene, what are you doing? You're separating. You're using physical force. What happens then? I now have no discretion to say, all right, you go your way, you go your way. I now have to say, you're under arrest, mutual combat. So you're taking away that discretion to say, all right, listen, you guys, you had a little too much to drink. I'm going to get you a ride home. Make sure you get home. Go your separate ways. Knock it off. You're both big boys. What they're saying now is if I use physical force to intervene in that, I am now forced to lock you up. It's going in the opposite direction of what the legislature is looking for. So it makes no sense to me. And again, this is a result of people making laws and not consulting with the stakeholders, the men and women that go out there and do the job every day. They're not consulting with the stakeholders, and other folks that are stakeholders in this whole in this deal is the community members. Like are people talking to the community members, to the people that actually live in these communities?
If anybody's been talking to you, if you're in the chat, if anybody has consulted you or asked you what you think, please make a comment saying that you've been consulted about this. If you've been consulted, I'll wait. That's funny. Nobody's putting any comments in. So I have to assume, Mike, that they weren't consulted either.
No, and Dean, that's the unfortunate part, and I think that's what these folks are missing. The folks that are making these or trying to pass these laws is that they are not consulting with the stakeholders, and I'm talking about stakeholders are the people who have the biggest stake in the matter. The men and women that respond to these calls, that are actually dealing with these situations on a daily basis. Those are the stakeholders. Those are the people who can really give you a perspective of what goes on in the street when they have to respond to calls. The other stakeholders in this, huge stakeholders, because it's the communities that you got to live in. It's the people that live in the communities that are being affected, ultimately can be affected by this bill that's being passed through. Those are the stakeholders. Talk to those people. I'm telling you, you get a whole different perspective if you talk to the people that matter.
Absolutely. So again, for those of you that are just jumping on, I'm seeing some new names here. I'm here with Detective Sergeant Michael Powell from the Malden Police Department, and we're kind of going over some of the points that really jumped out at me regarding Senate Bill 2800. So, Mike, why don't we do this? We've been going for a little less than an hour now. Why don't we take some questions? So, if you've asked questions throughout the chat and I might have missed you, because there's a lot of information I really felt was important to get out here, so we could kind of, educate you on what's going on. So, if you have questions and I missed it, I apologize, but please restate your questions. I'm going to start with Karen Ahern says, did the legislature converse with the courts on this? They will be well loved for those ideas. All right, I can tell there's a hint of sarcasm there, Karen, but I think that you're right on there. I think that they're going to have some explaining to do when people call the police for help, and it turns out we can't help them when we have to basically leave them holding the bag. All right, Dave Belmonte, are they speaking with anyone in the unions? That'd be a no. I can speak for all that. They have not spoken to any of the big unions, the state police unions, the city of Boston, certainly not my union where I work. So this was something that they just went and did basically overnight. All right, Joanne Melville. Hi, Joe. Oh, I'm sorry, Joan Melville. Also, people in situations you are describing will have an even lower opinion of police officers. Keeping them separated, so to speak, is up to the discretion of the officer. No more discretion, stuck with the letter of the law. No discretion. 100%, Joan. 100%. Like, there's a reason why there aren't robots doing this job. Discretion. People act like they don't want discretion, but I'm telling you, if discretion went away and we started arresting people and cutting tickets for every little infraction, there'd be some very unhappy people and there'd be some poor people because you'd be getting crushed with fines and all kinds of craziness for things that are just talk tos right now. A talk to is when I might pull you over and say, hey, listen, you ran that stop sign. Are you in a rush? Are you hurt? Are you sick? You're injured? No? Okay, listen, please don't do that again. Be on your way. That's a talk to. Well, those are all going to go away. All right. Do the unions agree with these changes or are they being forced? Mike, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah. So I don't want to speak on behalf of any unions, but I can give you my understanding of the situation is that no, this is being forced, for lack of a better term. This is being forced down our throats. It's being forced down everyone's throat. And again, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to change, but it has to involve. One, if you want change and you want it to be effective and meaningful and genuine, it can't be force-fed. It has to have an educational component to it. We have to understand it. They can't be, again, with some of the language in this law, you have to have a law degree. I'm just a layman. I interpret the law the best way I can based upon my training and time in law enforcement. But you almost need to have gone through law school, and even then it's difficult to interpret. I think this is definitely something. Again, I'm not speaking on behalf of any unions, but from my understanding, this is being forced down our throats, down the law enforcement community. It's being forced down our throats without any real consultation with again the stakeholders. I'm talking about the real men and women who are out in the street responding to these calls. You know what I'd like to do? I'd like to invite some of the politicians that are making some of these things, trying to make these changes. I invite you to come out, sit in a cruiser one night, respond to some of these calls, and really get to see and understand what men and women who wear this uniform, and do it with pride, with respect, professionalism. I invite you. Please come out and sit in a cruiser one night on a busy night and see what the men and women have to do in order to get through the day and some of these calls. Please.
100%. So let me get back in the comments here. Excuse me 1 second. Mike Capozzoli had something. Mike Capozzoli states, they're slowly dismantling law enforcement with laws like these. I don't know many law enforcement officers who don't want to be backed up by their fellow officers or their superiors, not giving many law enforcement officers incentive to stay in this line of work. It's definitely giving people that are on the fence, Mike. It's giving them a great big shove in the direction of moving on. All right, can you guys go after the union? Being a member is not free. They need to work for their members. So most unions, so Mike's being nicer than I am. I'm going to speak on behalf of all unions. There are no police unions in Massachusetts that are on board with this. Not one. Renee Conti Harding, I respect your point of view and experience. The bill summary states that this bill is to reform police standards and shift resources to build a more equitable, fair, and just Commonwealth that values Black lives and communities of color. What suggestions would you have to support that concept? So this particular bill, I hear what you're saying. And could things be better, Renee? Of course they could. But the problems that people are talking about, and again, I would challenge you too, Renee, if you have any specific examples to Massachusetts please let us know what they are. But these problems aren't happening in Massachusetts. Like the last thing that happened in Minnesota, that's 1,400 miles away. I've never been to Minnesota. I don't know anybody that works in Minnesota. That has nothing to do with how I work in Stoughton, Massachusetts, or how Mike works in Malden. And what happened down in Atlanta, which, again, people can debate this all day long, but according to the use of force continuum in Massachusetts, it was justified what happened. I don't love it. I wouldn't teach it. But according to objectively reasonable standards, you fight with two cops, you basically beat up two cops, you steal a taser from one of the cops, then you turn around and point it at him and try to fire it at him.
Yeah.
That's objectively reasonable. So if you have any specific examples, Renee, of this being a problem in Massachusetts, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about, this Bill 2800 pertains to Massachusetts, not other places where this stuff is actually happening.
Right.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, and I just wanted to touch upon something in Renee's comment. She makes she says, and I'm referencing shifting resources to build a more equitable, fair, and just Commonwealth that values black lives and communities of color. So, and I guess when you say shift resources, I guess this is, the defunding. I'm assuming is that what you meant, defunding police departments? And if that is what you're indicating, I think that I don't think that you should. I think you should invest if you want better change, right? If you want better educated men and women that work in law enforcement, you can't defund. You have to invest. So when you defund, that's not investing. So when you defund, you take away resources for better training, for more effective training. When you defund, you take, that may entail taking RSOs or resource officers from schools. And right now, it's more important than ever to have a positive law enforcement interaction with young people, because that's where it matters right now, with young people. When you take that connection, and it has to be a genuine, real connection, which in Massachusetts, I'm grateful to be working in the law enforcement community in Massachusetts, because as far as police officers, they have some of the best training in the country. And I'm not saying that because I wear the uniform, is because I've experienced it. We have some of the best training in the country. So we're not necessarily dealing with a lot of the issues that are going on 1,400 miles away. I'm not saying we're perfect. We're far from perfect, but we are not experiencing the issues that are going on in other parts of the country. And you can't fault all law enforcement for that. You have to judge. You have to base each case on a case-by-case basis. So when you say defund, and that's what I think you're assuming, that's what I'm assuming you're indicating as far as reallocate resources. You can't, again, you have to invest more, and people ultimately get what they pay for. And if you want continue to have a better police department, you have to invest in it. You can't take resources away, because that doesn't invest in law enforcement.
Hey, Mike, real quick, what's the first thing that goes when you take money away from police department? What's the first thing that's cut from the police budget?
Well,
the first thing that goes, you know what it is.
What remind me?
Training.
There you go.
Like, you're laughing, but I'm telling you right now, when you start cutting away money, the very first thing that goes is any extra training. Yep. Because at the end of the day, the number one thing that people want, they want police officers to respond to their problems, and they want people to take people away that need to be taken away. Mm-hmm. And you have to pay for that. So that's the stuff that's never going to go away. But all the extra stuff and training, as crazy as it sounds, is considered extra. Right. Oh, by the way, I'm the sergeant in charge of training in Stoughton too. So I know for a fact, when there's no money, guess what? Nobody's going to training. So it's it's one of those things, like Mike said, you got to be careful what you ask for. If they start taking money away from police departments, the very first thing that's going away is training. Right.
And Renee, I saw you comment there at the bottom, and you're right. Yeah, and I'm glad you believe and more training resources for because it's important. And again, the training is important for us because that's an investment. That's an investment in the men and women that do the job. And if you want it to be as effective and as efficient as possible, you have to constantly train. And I wish we had more of it. I really do. I wish we had more of it in different areas. But again, we're limited. A lot of police departments across the country, not just in Massachusetts, but they are strapped. So we're constantly trying to do, law enforcement in general is constantly trying to do more with less. And we and I don't want to get political here, but law enforcement right now wears way too many hats, and again, a lot of departments are strapped for resources, and that equates to money. And when you're strapped for resources and money, it affects training, and that shouldn't be the case. Because if you truly care and want to invest in something, you have to pay for it, unfortunately. So that's all I'll say about that. Sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry. Like I said, the whole point of this is for us to get information out there. And I think Renee's bringing up some at the surface, Renee, a lot of what you're saying is great. And I get it. And part of what you're saying is why I stayed in this line of work. I didn't get in this line of work for all the right reasons. I said in an earlier video that I got in this line of work, quite frankly, because I needed a steady paycheck and some benefits. But I stayed in this line of work once I realized that I had something to offer, because I wanted to be somebody that could advocate for people. And I wanted some things that happened to me when I was a kid that I knew then were unjust, and I really know now that were unjust. I wanted to be somebody that made sure that didn't happen and teach people not to do things the way things were done to me when I was mistreated by police. And one of the things you did ask, Renee, was what else can we do? We need more people to step up, if it's more people of color to step up and take the job. But right now, I know a lot of people. I can't name 3 people of color that want this job right now that aren't already working in it. So that's a problem too. Like, we don't have people that are chomping at the bit to take this job of any color, especially not black and brown people. So that's a problem too. You know, at some point, somebody's got to step out from behind their keyboard and they got to take the job like Mike and I did. So, but great points, Renee. I like where you're coming from. Again, we can talk about this whenever you see me. We can certainly talk more about this, but please keep coming back and adding some of this, some of your input. It's good to see different viewpoints. Mike Capizoli, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think D said, I assume that I'm D, said it best in a past video. Don't defund, reallocate funds from certain things to get extra trainings. For these law enforcement officers, if they want things to get better, they need to talk to law enforcement, interview, and see what ideas they come up with to help. Simply put, Mike, involve us in the decision-making process. Bill Parcells had a saying a few years ago, and if you work with me, you've heard this before. My wife has probably heard me say this too. If you want me to cook the meal, you got to let me shop for some of the groceries. And that's exactly what this is. You know, that's what they're expecting law enforcement to do. They want us to cook this meal and do all this wonderful, whimsical stuff and not ever hurt anybody, even though they're trying to hurt us and do crazy things to us. Well, if you want us to do that, even though it's impossible, but if you want us to do better at it, you got to bring us to the table and figure out what our issues are. You can't have people that have never been in harm's way a day in their life making these decisions, because they have no idea what they're talking about. They watch NYPD Blue and they think that every crime should be solved in 60 minutes, including commercial breaks. And that's not really the way it works. So I'll move on from there. I am an educator. Renee says, I am an educator in a pandemic. You don't have to explain more for less. Here. You know, I'll cheers you on that. And I know my wife, well, any parent that's been homeschooling their kids, Renee, will tip their cap to you on that one.
Yeah, all right, here's to you, Renee.
Yep. And up Renee again. And why do you think no one of color wants a job? Because it's hard, Renee. It's a hard job. I grew up not wanting to be a cop. I mean, if you could go back 22 years ago, half my life ago, and you ran into 22-year-old Dean Jenkins, I would have said what a lot of young kids said. I would have said, there's no way I want to be a cop. I hate cops. There's some cops are okay, but for the most part, I don't want to be in that. That was me at 22 years old.
Yeah.
But then I realized at some point I have to step up and do this job.
Yep.
I see a guy named D. Washington. D, I hope you don't mind me putting you out there. D. Washington is a black police officer. D. Washington grew up at some point and said, I have to help. I got to be part of the solution here. And
Yep.
we don't have enough people, Renee, that think that way. We have entirely too many people in society that want to sit behind keyboards and talk about what other people need to do and what somebody else should be doing instead of saying, what can I do? How can I step up and help?
Right.
There's too many people that do that. Mike, please speak to that.
Yeah, Dean, and just something I want to touch upon is as far as education, right? It's awesome that we're trying to educate law enforcement, but education has to go both ways. This can't be this has to be both ways. If the general public is going to educate law enforcement in regards to what they would like to see, it's also important for the general public to be educated on things to make interactions between law enforcement and communities better and more meaningful. But that requires education both ways. And Dean and I were talking about something earlier before we went live in regards to there's a narrative that's being told in some of these households to some young people, and I don't think that it's fair. And it's in regards to law enforcement. So if some folks have been watching the news, and you see these little, these 5 and 6 year old children holding up these signs and chanting "F the police," like that's an issue. And to force that thought process on somebody so young. If that conversation is already taking place in the home as a young child, 5, 6 years old, holding up that sign and chanting those words, that's a conversation that we need to have and figure out where the disconnect was there. But that shouldn't be happening. So when this thought process is put into children's heads at that young, what happens when they get older? What happens when they get older and there's already a disconnect between law enforcement and the community at such a young age? It's disheartening, and it's not fair to the child. Anyways, I digress, Dean.
No, like I said, Mike, this is this topic brings out a visceral reaction in a lot of people, and again, and I see Renee says, my point exactly, change your reputation. And my question to you is, I hate to answer a question or a comment with a question, Renee, but what more can I do to change the reputation of police officers? I'm doing the job. I advocate for people. I'm in the community. I work with kids. And as you know, I'm hard on kids. But you know what? Those kids that I'm hard on, they're going to grow up one day and they're going to say, you know what? This guy cared about me, invested time in me. This guy had expectations of me. This guy wanted me to do something and expected me to give everything I have and to fight through tough times. That's what we can do. We can be available for people. We can do things like this. We can host conversations, but there's only so much that we can do. I guess the best thing I can say to you, Renee, is we're trying. We're trying. Those of us that are in the job, we are trying, and we're doing everything we can. I hate having to explain myself and have to justify what I do because of that asshole in Minnesota, what he did to George Floyd. Nobody is more upset with that guy than we are, Mike and I. Nobody.
Yep.
But here we are. I'm explaining myself for somebody who did something 1,400 miles away at a place I've never been to with people I've never met before. And that's the tough part here, and it's disheartening, but I'm not ready to throw in the towel yet, and I know that Mike's not ready to throw in the towel yet either. We're gonna keep, as long as y'all are here, and people are willing to have these conversations, and people want to support us.
Yep.
We're gonna do what we can, and hopefully we can educate a few people along the way and get you to understand how things work. We're getting down to it. It's been 75 minutes, Mike. I mean, we've really been talking for a long time. So I'm just going to throw out a couple quick things that I want people to do. You people that are out there that don't have any training, you've never worked on the job, I want to challenge you. I want you to go to your local PD whenever the COVID stuff kind of dies down and people start having citizens police academies again. Enroll in one of these citizens police academies. Go in, have an open mind, and get some of this training. You know, we do an awesome one in Stoughton, and I'm not patting ourselves on the back of the Stoughton, but we really do a good job. I think anybody that's been through it would recommend it highly. What we do, and see things from our side of things. Mike, do you guys have anything like that in Malden?
Yeah, we also have a citizens police academy, and I think it's a great way to give the general public a better understanding of some of the things that we do. Just like the Citizens Police Academy, these conversations that Dean's having with folks, I think is awesome. It really adds more transparency, and it gives folks a different it may give folks a different perspective. I mean, to talk to real people that are actually out there doing the job. And I'm not saying that we're right. I'm not saying that you have to believe, and I don't want you to believe anything that's coming out of my mouth. I want you to go out there and do your own research. Look at the numbers. I don't want to sway you one way or the other. I just want to simply to get people to open up and to have an open mind about things in regards to what's going on with the law enforcement in the community, and try to my big thing is you can't paint law enforcement with the same brush. You can't, because it's not fair. It really isn't. But I think in order to give people a better understanding of who we really are, not Sergeant Powell, but me, Mike Powell. I put on that badge, and that's what I do for my job. That's what I do for work. But I'm Mike Powell. All right. So, and I think if you had a better understanding and a better idea of who we really are, we're representative of the community. I mean, we're right out of the community. So we bleed just like you. We cry just like you. We deal with the same life struggles just like you. We have families just like you. So there's nothing different between you and I. As far as me being a police officer and the general public, there's nothing. I just get paid full time to keep the community safe. But we're both the same. We're all the same. Sometimes we have different perspectives on life experiences, but we're all the same. We go through the same things. The men and women that wear that uniform, they go through the same thing that the general public. They live in our community. They live in the communities that everyone else lives in. We're no different. We're not aliens. We don't take off our uniform, then get shipped off to a different planet. We live here with you in your communities. We go through the same things, the same life experience as you. So just try to keep that in mind when you see a man or a woman in the uniform. We're just like you.
Awesome, Mike. So I'm going to wrap up. James Lundy, I'm just going to I'm going to comment on James's question here, and then we're going to wrap up. So James says, does the new bill affect detectives in their duties, or is it more to handcuff patrolmen? James, it handcuffs everybody in every capacity of law enforcement. Now, it's like a butterfly effect. It starts with the people that are the most accessible to the public, which are the patrolmen, and then their immediate supervisors, which are the sergeants. It handcuffs detectives because detectives, they do more specialized investigations. But yes, sometimes they have to develop probable cause through reasonable suspicion. And reasonable suspicion that's a step at which we can legally detain somebody before we arrest, and we can investigate. But if they are eliminating that reasonable suspicion step, it really makes it much more difficult to investigate situations. And then if you heard me say earlier that we can't use any force unless it's an arrestable, unless we're going to arrest somebody, we can't use any force, no matter how minor. So there's a lot going on here. And Mike Huff, he was one of our co-workers back at Longwood many moons ago. He says he went to the trooper program that the state police ran years ago for teens at the State Police Academy in New Braintree. And it was a great experience, and they still do it. So, and Renee, thank you for coming in again. Please, I love different viewpoints, because people need people that normally wouldn't talk. If I can get them together in one forum with these difficult conversations, that's the whole point of what I'm trying to do here. All right. So please come back, stay involved with these, get other people like that, and maybe we can have an exchange of ideas, and maybe you can learn something that you didn't know before, and I can learn something from you I didn't know. And that's the whole point of this. So, folks, on that note, I want to say thank you to Mike Powell for taking an hour and change out of his time away from his family tonight to do this. Mike, you're a great inspiration to a lot of people. You were one of the finest coworkers I ever worked with, and I'm so happy to see the way your career has taken off. It's really it really makes me proud to think that I was there at the beginning when you started.
Yeah, right back at you, Dean, and thank you very much for for the invite and letting me kind of speak a little bit. It's good for the soul. So I hope that you continue to do the things that you're doing. I think it's important for people to hear to hear different stories. I think it's very, very important. So keep on doing your thing, Dean.
Absolutely. So, Mike, just promise me one thing. Promise me you'll come back if I in the future when we do more of these.
Not a problem. Anytime you call, I'm there.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your support. Remember, like our YouTube channel, like our Facebook, share these posts, talk this up. Let's get more people involved in these difficult conversations. So until the next one, everybody be safe out there. And again, remember, #supply the why. Good night, everybody.